My name's Jo Whitfield and I work for Beat. We are the UK's eating disorder charity, and we provide support for people who have an eating disorder and also support for anyone who might be looking after somebody with an eating disorder or supporting somebody with recovery. We also campaign for change. We work with policy and decision makers to bring about positive change across the whole of the UK for those affected by eating disorders. Yeah, we did start life back in 1989. You're testing me now on my Beat history. Back then we were known as the Eating Disorder Association, and we changed our name to Beat, the UK's eating disorder charity. Our head office is in Norwich, but our staff are based across the whole of the UK. Especially since the pandemic, that's meant that people from all over the UK now work on our helpline, delivering support to people. Yeah, we're less reliant on that one sort of central office. We also used to have offices in London and in Warrington, but in more recent times, we've seen a move away from physical office space, as have lots of organisations, as we've moved to a more hybrid way of working. So eating disorders are complex mental illnesses, and they can be caused by a wide range of different factors. So, for example, big life changes like grief, divorce, moving away from home for the first time. It can be caused by genetics. Low self-esteem can be a contributing factor. As can societal pressures as well. It's really important, though, to remember that every person will experience an eating disorder differently. And there are many reasons somebody might develop an eating disorder. No two people will have the same reasons behind developing an eating disorder. As I mentioned, eating disorders are really complex, and there are many different types of eating disorders as well. So, for example, as you mentioned, binge eating disorder. Another type of eating disorder is ARFID, which is avoidant. It actually stands for avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. And this is when a person restricts or avoids certain types of foods. For instance, somebody with ARFID might experience distress about the texture of food, or they might have had a stressful experience in the past with choking or vomiting with food. That can lead them then to develop ARFID. And then there are other types of eating disorders as well, including bulimia, which people might be more aware of. And bulimia usually involves cycles of binge eating and then restriction afterwards by perhaps taking laxatives, or some people might over-exercise or vomit. And then there's also the eating disorder called anorexia, which quite a lot of people might be aware of. And this is where somebody limits how much they eat and drink. There's also another type of eating disorder that is called OSFED, which stands for otherwise specified food intake disorder. And this is where a person has an eating disorder, but that eating disorder doesn't necessarily meet any of the other kind of like eating disorder categories. So they then, it may be several kind of like different elements of different eating disorders, and that's when somebody is diagnosed then with OSFED. Start showing signs and symptoms of an eating disorder, the early intervention. And what we mean by that is that access to high quality specialist treatment at the earliest opportunity. Yeah, in terms of ensuring that somebody can make a full and sustained recovery from an eating disorder, that early intervention is is really, really important. That there are lots of different warning signs that people can look out for that might indicate that somebody has an eating disorder. We've got a full list of those warning signs on our website, but some of those warning signs might include somebody saying that they've eaten earlier or will eat later on in the day, or perhaps that they have saying that they've eaten more than they actually have. Sometimes a symptom could be very strict dieting or avoiding food they think is fattening. Hiding food can also be a symptom of an eating disorder, as can taking a very long time to eat meals. People might also show anxiety, particularly about eating in front of other people. So often eating in kind of like social settings, going out and socializing with friends, using food as a way of socializing. That can be very difficult for people who have an eating disorder because of that anxiety around eating in public, eating in front of others. Then some of the physical signs can include weight loss, tiredness, and stomach pains. And then in the case of bulimia and binge eating disorder, a sign could be eating large amounts of food, so binging. And then in the case of bulimia, somebody might purge after binging. So that could be through vomiting, through over-exercise, or through the use of laxatives. There's lots of different signs that might indicate that somebody is experiencing an eating disorder. Difficult at the moment because of the lack of research out there to determine how many people from ethnic or cultural minority backgrounds have an eating disorder. However, I think it was back in October 2020, NHS stats revealed that hospital admissions for eating disorders among ethnic minorities in England rose by over half over the last 3 years prior to that. And that was a much higher rate than for white ethnicities, which then prompted concerns that there may be cultural or racial factors driving the rise in admissions that the NHS had experienced. But without that specific research, it's really, really difficult to jump to conclusions. So one of the areas of work that BEAT undertakes is calling for more research into eating disorders and the wide range of people that eating disorders affect. The kind of like common misconceptions is that it's an illness that affects teenage girls, for example, but it can really affect anybody, regardless of age, gender, cultural background, ethnicity. Eating disorders don't discriminate, in terms of who they affect. You could be any age and and develop an eating disorder. They are really complex mental illnesses, and it's estimated that they impact around 1.25 million people in the UK. And those people, they are, of all ages, genders and backgrounds. So on our website, we have full details of all of our different training events and conferences. Coming up later on in the year, we will have our Frontline conference, which is a conference for people who are supporting somebody with recovery from an eating disorder. So for carers, that could be parents, it could be partners, it could be siblings, anybody who's supporting a loved one with recovery from an eating disorder. That will be taking place, I think it's in November. I'm not sure if we've publicly launched the conference yet, but details of that will be available on our website if they're not already available. And every year we run something called Eating Disorder Awareness Week, and that usually takes place in late February, early March. And this year just gone, our theme was eating disorders in men and eating disorders. We haven't yet confirmed next year's theme. That's something that Team Beat are working away in the background, busy planning at the moment. But I would imagine that a little bit later on this year, we'll probably be able to make an announcement about next year's, what the topic will be for next year's Eating Disorder Awareness Week. Of focus at the moment on reducing obesity levels across the UK, and that's a really, really important piece of work. But it's also really important that public health campaigns addressing obesity take into account people with eating disorders, and it's really important that those campaigns are designed in such a way that don't cause harm to people with eating disorders. So for example, In England last year, some legislation was introduced to make calorie labelling on menus mandatory, or restaurants and cafes that were over a certain size, so kind of like aimed more at the sort of like chain restaurants and cafes and takeaway outlets. And unfortunately, that legislation has been very difficult for people with eating disorders. So, you know, constantly being exposed to the calorie counts on you know, different meals and things. In England and Scotland, the governments in both of those countries are currently considering whether or not to introduce that. So something that BEAT has been doing has been working very closely with those governments to encourage them to not make that mandatory. And interestingly, there is some research underway in England at the moment to monitor the impact that that legislation has had on people with eating disorders. So in both Scotland and Wales, we have been able to get both of those governments to pause on the introduction of that legislation while they review, you know, what comes out of this research that's happening in England, which we see as, you know, we really welcome that. And very much hope that that those, you know, devolved governments will take an evidence-based approach to. An interesting question, and it's one that we have kind of you know, thought about a lot within BEAT, and it's so difficult to say with certainty if eating disorders are spoken about now more than ever before. But we do feel that conversations about eating disorders have massively improved in the last decade or so. We've seen now more people than ever before are needing eating disorder treatment, especially since the pandemic, which was obviously a time of great uncertainty. People were isolated and under, you know, immense stress and pressure. But some of this rise that we've seen in people needing specialist treatment could be because more people are able to now spot the signs and symptoms that we've discussed, and feel more able to reach out for support. So yeah, it's a really tricky question to say whether you know, the number of people experiencing eating disorders has gone up, but from what we can see and from the data that we have, it does look like they've gone up, but it could be that that's due to better people being more able to spot the signs and symptoms than they were previously, because they are now talked about more, as with lots of mental health and mental illnesses. The conversations are happening, I suppose, more frequently than they were, which is good in terms of breaking down that stigma and misconceptions and empowering people to feel that they can reach out for support, whereas in the past perhaps they felt that that there wouldn't be support there for them, or that they just didn't recognize that you know that there perhaps was that they were perhaps unwell. is worried either about themselves or a loved one, we would always recommend reaching out to their GP as soon as possible and asking for an urgent appointment, or contacting a local eating disorder service if that is available. On the Beat website, we have something called Help Finder, which people can search to see what support is available locally to them. Our helpline is open every single day of the year to help those with eating disorders, as well as anybody who is supporting somebody with recovery. So our helpline number is 0808 801 0677. And as I mentioned, we're open every single day of the year, including weekends and bank holidays. And we also run online support groups and provide information via our website. And our website is beateatingdisorders.org.uk. So we would always encourage people to reach out for support at the earliest possible time. The earlier that somebody can get specialist support, the greater the chances they have of making a full recovery from an eating disorder. Our website address is beateatingdisorders.org.uk. So that's all one word, beateatingdisorders.org.uk. Facebook account, we're on there as Beat Eating Disorders. We are on Instagram as Beat ED Support. We are on Twitter as well as Beat ED. And we're also on YouTube as Beat Eating Disorders on YouTube. Yeah, the helpline number is 0808 801 0677.